Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I would like to welcome you all to our telecourse, The Way of the Psychonaut. In the last three teleseminars, we explored two domains of the new extended cartography. We looked at the postnatal biographical domain, and we saw that essentially is identical to the current model, which is being used in psychiatry and psychology. We had to make three major additions. First, that if we explore the biographical level with holotropic states of consciousness, we will not remember things, we will relive things in full experiential regression. We also find out that physical traumas are important psychotrauma, which is not acknowledged by current psychiatry. And then we discovered the existence of the COEX system. Now, when we went to the perinatal level, it basically revealed a major logical error, which is done by current clinicians and academicians, which means denying the existence of the memory of birth on the basis of that myelin fallacy. But essentially, there would not be a big conceptual problem introducing the birth memory into the current model, because there is a very complicated and complex organ. The brain of the newborn certainly has the power to record the memory. Now, this is not true about the domain that we'll explore today, which is the transpersonal domain. That really represents major challenge, not just to the current conceptual framework of psychiatry and psychology, but actually to the whole materialistic philosophy of Western science. So the way we can define transpersonal experiences is that when we have them, we transcend the boundaries of the body ego and also the limitations of our senses. So the best way to explain what transpersonal experiences are is to compare them with our perception of ourselves and of the world in the usual ordinary state of consciousness. So if we are in the usual state of consciousness, we cannot see, for example, ships when they are beyond the horizon. We cannot see the other side of the moon. We cannot perceive things that are happening in some distant locations. We cannot hear our friends talking when we are in San Francisco and they are in New York City. We cannot feel the softness of the lambskin unless we actually get into physical contact with it with our hand. We also can experience only what is happening here and now, and we can be only at one point of time, one moment of time, and one location. Now, all this is transcended in transpersonal experiences. In transpersonal experiences, we can fully experience events that are happening in a distant location. For example, in out-of-body experiences, in experiences of astral projection. We can also experience things that happened in the past. Normally, we cannot experience the past. We can get in touch with what's happening in the past only if we have photographs or have videos. And we certainly cannot experience anything that has not happened yet, that's happening in the future. So the transpersonal experiences really transcend all these limitations. And we can divide them into four major categories. In the first category, there will be primarily transcendence of the limitations of space. So the first movement in the direction of this category of experiences would be when we have a sense that we became one with another person, that could be called the experience of dual unity. Pregnant mothers know that when they feel that kind of sense of identification with the fetus or with the baby that they are nursing. People experience that in some really good lovemaking, particularly if the lovemaking was happening in some holotropic state of consciousness, for example, induced by some substances. We can also experience ourselves as another person without bringing in our own identity, a kind of a mediumistic experience of another person. We can, in those holotropic states of a transpersonal nature, we can experience group consciousness. For example, the experience of mothers of the world or children of the world or population of India. And this doesn't stop with the human species. We can have very convincing, authentic experiences of identification with members of some other species, animals, as well as plant life. So in these holotropic states, everything that we experience as an object outside, we can also experience as a subjective state of consciousness. So what is object in everyday life can be a subjective experience in holotropic states. Then the second category involves transcendence of linear time rather than spatial limitations. In a sense, this begins also when we have experiences of something that happened in childhood, that happened in infancy. We talked about the possibility of reliving birth, for reliving something from the prenatal state. Now, we usually think about this as memories which are recorded in some material substrate, primarily our brain. But it seems to be more appropriate to think about these experiences as actually transcending linear time. And the reason for this is that these experiences, the possibility of these experiences continues. It can take us before the moment where we were born. So we can have experiences of our ancestors. We can have racial experiences, collective experiences. Sometimes these experiences are associated with the feeling of déjà vu, déjà vécu. This is not the first time this is happening to me. I recognize that I once experienced this particular situation in the past. So this would be the category of past life experiences. We can have what's called phylogenetic experiences, experiences of our animal ancestors. We can even experience things that happened before the human species emerged. We can have experiences which are geological, experiences which are cosmogenetic, and so on. Now, the third category of experiences is even more strange because it takes us into realms that the industrial civilization doesn't even consider real. So we can have experiences of what Jung called the archetypal realm, the mythological realm. We can have experiences from a mythology of any culture that has ever existed, whether or not we know that culture intellectually. So those were observations that led Carl Gustav Jung to the idea that we don't have just the Freudian individual unconscious, but we have a collective unconscious where we carry the whole cultural heritage of humanity. So we can have an experience of Shiva Nataraja, Shiva, you know, the dancer of the cosmos. We can have experiences of being in Sumerian underworld. We can have an experience of being in the Eskimo paradise, which is like in the realm of the Aurora Borealis. So those are fantastic experiences that certainly challenge some of the fundamental conceptual frameworks of psychology and psychiatry, and also the basic metaphysical assumptions of Western materialistic science in relation to the nature of consciousness and the relationship of consciousness to matter. Now, there's yet another category of transpersonal experiences, which we can call psychoid. The term psychoid was something that was used by Carl Gustav Jung again. He borrowed it from Hans Driesch, the founder of vitalism. Now, those are experiences in which something that happens to us intrapsychically, vision, for example, is associated with events in the external world. So this would be already something that occurs when we have powerful synchronicities, when we have a dream, or we have a vision, we have an experience in the holotropic breathwork or in psychedelic session. And events happen in what we call objective reality, the material world, that seem to be in meaningful connection with that inner experience. And at the same time, we cannot find any explanation in terms of horizontal causality, how those two events could be connected. Now, this goes then further, and there are experiences where something happens in the internal world, and also has connection to something in the physical reality. For example, this happens often with the UFO phenomena. There was a situation where a Japanese 747 flew over Alaska, and the ground-based radar recorded two objects, and the passengers and the crew in the 747 were observing a spaceship that was flying together with the airplane. And this made headlines, and then the operator became embarrassed and said that he reviewed the evidence, and on closer inspection, that second point that was showing on the radar was just an artifact. This was not indicating that there was a real object. But the original report was there were two such objects that were involved there. Another kind of situation would be what's called magic. It has to do with events where there's an intrapsychic event, psychological event associated with something that happens in the external world. So I described in the book When the Impossible Happens, an example of such ceremonial magic, when in the middle of the worst drought in California, we were doing a peyote ceremony with a wonderful shaman, Huichol shaman, Don Jose. And when we were beginning the ceremony, participant in the group said, Don Jose, we have terrible drought in California. Could we make it a rain ceremony? And Don Jose said, okay. So we went through the night, and then in the morning we all went to the ocean where Don Jose wanted to make an offering to the ocean. And as we were walking down, it started to drizzle. And people were very excited, saying, oh, Don Jose, we made rain. And Don Jose said, well, it always happens. It's Kupuri, it's the blessing of the gods. It means we did a good ceremony. But before we came down to the ocean, it was pouring, and it continued to pour for 6 hours, the only time that it rained in California during that drought. So there was, again, a synchronicity, that we thought we were doing a rain ceremony, and it actually brought or was associated with rain. And this is known from the native culture that typically when the shamans who are known to make rain, when they conduct this ceremony, it tends to rain. I mean, the people are not stupid. I mean, you would not have the reputation of a rain-making shaman if you would be sort of beating drums and seldom anything happens. So those are kind of the synchronicities that we can call psychoid, when something that's happening in the psychological space also is associated with something in physical reality. For example, people see flying saucer, and they come there in the morning, and there is a circular space of grass which is burned. So any number of situations like this. There are also experiments which show the possibility of intentional telekinesis, even laboratory telekinesis. There was a woman, a psychic in the Soviet Union, who was capable to stop a frog heart. And the American researchers like Stanley Krippner went there, and they were witnessing it, and there were all these possibilities of controlling that experiment to be sure that this was actually happening. So these are the four categories of transpersonal experiences: transcending spatial limitations, transcending limitations of linear time, and then having experiences from these archetypal domains, from the mythological realm, meeting of archetypal beings, or visiting some archetypal realms. For example, experiences of heavens or paradises or hells of various cultures, or having experience of the underworld, the way it's described in shamanic literature. And then we have the next category, in which there are these correlations between something that's primarily an event in the psyche and something that is happening in the external world. Now, the thing that becomes obvious in studying the transpersonal experiences, that as we get involved in intrapsychic exploration, when we come to a certain point in regression, like reaching the perinatal domain, something strange happens. It's like a multi-dimensional Möbius flip. The Möbius phenomenon is if you have a strip of paper and you turn it 180 degrees and you glue them together. If you move with your finger on the outside, then before you know, you are on the inside. So something similar happens in the psyche when we do intrapsychic exploration. We go into the regression, and then around the perinatal level, suddenly something happens, and we are experiencing the world, the external world, the world at large, but we are not experiencing it in the usual way, which means through our senses, but through some kind of representation which exists in our psyche. So this really is something that you find in many of the esoteric systems, the idea that the individual is a micro world that somehow contains the whole macro world. And we then find very sort of puzzling, paradoxical statements in these systems, like as above, so below, as without, so within. And we discover that we can learn about the world in two different ways. One is through perception, through sensory perception, and then analysis of the data and synthesis of the data. But there is another very, very powerful way of learning about the world, which is going inside and learning about different aspects of the world in such a way that we have experiential identification. We learn about the external world by becoming certain aspects of the world. So the transpersonal experiences very frequently bring accurate, authentic, new information that is way beyond the intellectual knowledge and capacity of the individual who's having these experiences. So, for example, you can identify with various animal species and get new information that you didn't have before. So I worked with somebody who identified himself experientially with a caterpillar, the experience of a caterpillar, and went through the process of metamorphosis. And then after the session told me, do you know that the butterfly does not form from the caterpillar, that the caterpillar completely dissolves and the butterfly is really created out of the liquid, out of the watery substance inside of the chrysalis. And I didn't know it at the time, but I went and studied it, and it was absolutely true. There are proteolytic hormones or enzymes in the chrysalis, so that at certain stage it's just a liquid environment, and there are several cells which are called imago cells, and they, in some sense, govern the development of the butterfly from this watery environment. We had a workshop in Belgium. There was a woman who was reliving her birth, and then after reliving her human birth, then had the experience of going back into the womb, into a kind of oceanic environment, and experienced herself as a pregnant whale, and then experienced delivery as a whale. And I found out that it always has to happen with the tail first, which was something that she didn't know biologically. And I would go and check it. And again, this was true. Or people have the experience of identification with predatory birds, and they see the environment in a way that you would see through the optical system of the predatory bird, the eagle or a falcon, and so on. There are certain capacities that we don't have as human beings in terms of seeing things very large because they have the lens closer to the surface, and being able to zoom. People also had the experience of understanding how these birds fly, what you do with your wings, how you work the air currents, and so on. So unless you are Leonardo da Vinci, you don't study those kinds of things, or unless it's part of your professional interest. The other thing is this new information can come about mythological realms. So, for example, I had a situation in Prague where I worked with a person who was thanatophobic, pathological fear of death, of dying, although there were no reason in terms of the physical condition, the medical condition. And we were working with LSD, and in one of the sessions, in the context of reliving birth and confronting death, which was associated with birth, the threat, vital threat, which was in the birth canal. And at a certain point, he got up and took off the eye shades and asked for papers, something to draw. And in a very hectic way, he worked on creating some kind of a complex geometrical formation, geometrical pattern, and was dissatisfied with it. He was scrambling it and throwing it away until finally he got something that he was relatively satisfied with. And he had a vision of the entry into the underworld, which was guarded by a goddess in the form of a pig. And at that time, I was still very, very Freudian. We used free associations. I was trying to understand what that meant, and we didn't get very far. Now, when I then came to Esalen, Joseph Campbell, the amazing mythologist, like a walking encyclopedia of world mythology, he used to come on Wednesday to lunch with us. And I had always prepared some mythological experiences that people had in their sessions, and consulted Joseph if he knew something about it. And I told him this story, and he was very excited. He said, "This is fantastic." You see what that was? This was the Molokan devouring mother of night, which is the goddess of the Molokan culture in New Guinea. And in this culture, the boys breed pigs that they then kill during puberty rite, and it symbolizes their mother. So this is like severing the connection, the entanglement, emotional entanglement with their mother. And they also have a goddess who guards the entrance into the underworld, and their whole life they practice drawing this very complex geometrical pattern, because they believe that when they die, as they go into the underworld, that there would be the goddess that would require them to accurately portray the geometrical pattern. So this very, very strange, bizarre kind of experience suddenly turned out to be something that was a part of a New Guinea Aboriginal culture. So the transpersonal experiences violate many of the basic assumptions of materialistic science. And they show, for example, that there are non-local connections in the world, that consciousness is associated not only with people, but with all of life, both animal life and botanical life. You can also have experiences of inanimate objects. I described quite a few of those experiences that happened in sessions with a substance called ketamine, ketalar, which is a dissociative anesthetic. So it shows something very interesting about human beings, very, very strange, paradoxical nature of human beings, that on the one hand, we can think about ourselves as Newtonian objects, bodies living in a world that has Newtonian properties, linear time and three-dimensional space. And our everyday experiences confirm systematically that this is the way it is. We live in a material world that has Newtonian property. But in these holotropic states of consciousness, we suddenly discover that we are also, under these different circumstances, in a holotropic state of consciousness, we are a field of consciousness that has no boundaries, and that we can get access to information about the universe, about any aspect of the universe, at least potentially. So there's like a complementary situation that almost parallels something that you find on the subatomic level, the Niels Bohr, the complementary principle, where photons can manifest as particles in some kind of experiments. If you structure the experiment differently, you get a sense that light is really electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic waves. So in a similar way, in everyday life, it makes a lot of sense to think about the world as material and us as being material objects living in the material world. But when we are in a holotropic state of consciousness, then suddenly all the limitations of the physical world that we experience normally are not operating, are not available. So now we'll give you some more specific examples. The $64,000 question, of course, is we have these experiences of the transpersonal world, but are they ontologically real? Is it possible that they are just products of some pathological process in the brain, or they are our imagination? So what is the ontological nature of these experiences? So every time there was anything that I could test, I have done, over the last 60 years, when there was an information that was testable. So I already mentioned some of the experiences of identification with animals, where I would go into books of zoology, botany, and see if I can find confirmation of the information that was coming through these experiences. The same thing with something happened in the person's childhood or infancy or birth, and there was a way of verifying it. I always try to verify quite a few observations of birth experiences that people had, that where there were witnesses that we got access to the mother or somebody from the family, or there were some clinical records. So many instances, the information that was coming through these experiences was verifiable, was testable. And then when we go to the experience of conception on a cellular level, which again is something that happens in transpersonal experiences. You can become identified with the sperm and the ovum and experience conception. Even there was a very interesting confirmation about that, which came from Graham Farrant, who was a primal therapist in Australia. And in his non-ordinary state of consciousness, holotropic state of consciousness, he went to conception and witnessed conception on a cellular level of consciousness, and had a video recording of that. And then he came to a conference of pre- and perinatal psychology in San Diego and presented this. What happened that in his experience of conception, he saw that the egg was not passive. We usually thought about the sperm being the active, sort of, seeking the ovum and penetrating, and the egg being kind of passive. And what he saw in his experience of conception was that the egg was like an amoeba, was kind of sending little pieces of protoplasma and reaching for the sperms as if it was somehow participating in the selection of which sperm is going to be allowed to go in. And then what happens that 4 months later, the Karolinska Universitet in Sweden released the first electronic microscope pictures of conception, and this was exactly what the pictures show: the activity of the ovum in seeking the sperm. And so what Graham did in this conference, he was showing a picture which had a split screen, where he was describing what he was experiencing in half of the screen, and in the other half we were watching the recording, the film of the Karolinska Universitet. So I will talk about a couple of situations where the information that was coming had to do with historical events. There was a person in our month-long workshop who started doing inner work with Arthur Janov in his institute in Los Angeles. And then was together with some other people, they were very dissatisfied with what was happening in the Janov Institute. They valued very much the primal therapy, the method, but they started taking them into the spiritual realm, into transpersonal realm, which Janov didn't recognize. He talked about it as a cop-out from primal pain. He didn't recognize that this was an authentic domain in the psyche. And so finally, these people split and they created a group in Toronto where they continued doing primal therapy, but allowed themselves to explore these spiritual realms as something that was valuable and authentic. And then they discovered my book called Realms of the Human Unconscious, which gave the cartography of the spaces that primal therapy was taking them into. And this Carl already started having experiences that seemed like a past life situation. And then decided to go to our month-long workshop at Esalen, where the process continued and completed itself. And what happened that in the process of reliving birth, he suddenly started having flashes of experiences that seemed to be coming from history. He experienced a fortress, and there were soldiers in the fortress, and he was puzzled because the soldiers look like Spanish, but the environment looked more like Scotland or some northern England. And there was a situation of battle, where there was a lot of killing and bloodshed and people sort of being killed and thrown over the ramparts and dying on the beach. The fortress was on a rock overlooking the ocean above the beach. And he was an architect, and so at a certain point he decided to document this and did a lot of drawings which were showing the architecture of the fortress and different scenes that he saw there. A certain tunnel which existed underground, places where they kept their food and ammunition and so on. And then at a certain point, he realized that he was with the soldiers, but he was not a soldier. He was a priest, and he saw the cross and the Bible. And at a certain point, he looked at his hand, and there was a seal ring, and he recognized the initials on the seal ring. So he kept painting some of the very, very meticulous kind of architectural pictures of the fortress, but some of the violent scenes where he used very, very impulsive finger painting. And at a certain point, he experienced himself as being gored by a sword and thrown over the ramparts and dying on the ocean. He started seeing all kinds of connections between the past life experience and things that he didn't understand about his life. And there was also a very, very interesting thing about the sort of anatomical aspect of that. He had the sternum sort of indented in a very, very strange way. And then in this breathwork session, he experienced that this is where the sword went through his chest. So these were the kind of things that were coming out of this process, and it was very puzzling to him. He didn't understand what it was, where it was coming from. But then suddenly he had an impulse to go and spend a vacation in Ireland, and he came to Western Ireland and took a lot of pictures. And when he came home, he was showing it to his family. And then to his surprise, there were 11 pictures that were not showing anything particularly interesting, but it's like in an impulsive way, again, he took a series of pictures going in a certain direction. And so being a very analytical type, he took the map, figured out where he was standing, which direction he was taking the photograph. And he realized that the line that he was studying went across ruins of an ancient fortress called Dunador, or Forte de Oro, Golden Fortress. And so he went to the library and started studying the history. And he found something very fascinating, which was that in the 16th century, when there was a war between Spain and England, there was a group of about 400 Spanish soldiers who landed there near Dunanor, and they were joined with a couple hundred Irish rebels, and they occupied the Dunanor fortress, and British army came and was lying there in siege of this fortress. And they were led by General Grey, and a person who traveled with this British army was Sir Walter Raleigh, who was known for bringing smoking to England from the colonies in the New World. And he functioned as a mediator, and he made an agreement with the soldiers inside of the fortress that if they opened the gates, they would give them free egress. And so they bought it, and they opened the gates, and the British army came in, and they slaughtered them all and threw them over the ramparts. So this was an astonishing kind of confirmation of the experience that he had, but he still was not satisfied. He continued to sort of seeking more information until he finally found a very specific document which said that they were accompanied by a priest, and it gave the name of the priest. And to his astonishment, Carl realized that the initials of the name of the priest were identical to the initials that he drew on that ring. So I would like to show you some of the paintings that he did as an illustration of this particular case. Okay, so this is one of the pictures when he had just an overall look at the fortress in his session. You can see the rock, and then the fortress on top of it. And at one point he saw something similar, but now there was like a lot of blood that was pouring sort of and going down this rock and to the beach. And these are some of the sort of meticulous, he was an architect, so very meticulous drawings that he made of what he saw as the interior of the fortress. And you can see that there was a tunnel which somehow led to the beach. Okay, these are some more details about the layout of the fortress. And now this is the underground tunnel, and this somehow, in his experience, is fused with the tunnel of births. Which people going through births have the experience of a tunnel moving towards light, and suddenly he realized it was not just the birth canal, but it was also the tunnel from his past life experience. And this is a more elaborate, painting of that tunnel as he saw it. Now you can see the very impulsive finger drawing of the killing of the priest, identified as himself in a previous lifetime. And this is he experienced himself dying on the beach after he was thrown over the ramparts. So there is another case history that I would love to share with you. It's a patient whom I call in my books Renata. She came to treatment for a very severe cancerophobia. She had a variety of physical problems that she interpreted as cancer, and it moved, from the throat to the uterus, and then she thought it was in the back, and then it was a brain tumor and so on. And she always got negative results in the hospital. They didn't find anything, and she didn't trust that. She was accusing them that they must have exchanged the X-rays and so on, and became a real problem for them. And finally ended in our department in the Psychiatric Research Institute in Prague. And after some unsuccessful conventional treatment, she was admitted into the LSD program. It was a very interesting process in general, where she was linking it to kind of a coexist system that involved an abuse by the stepfather, and then, partially going to birth. But what I would like to talk about was that in this process, when we were using medium dosages of LSD, but a whole series of sessions, this is what we call psycholytic therapy. There were 4 sessions where there was practically nothing but scenes from a certain very important period of Czech history, which was at the beginning of the 17th century. We lost the battle with the Habsburg dynasty. Until that time, we were an independent kingdom. And this battle of the White Mountain basically started 300 years of the Habsburg domination, of hegemony of the Habsburg dynasty over what was Bohemia, which was the old name for what is now Czech Republic. Now, in these sessions, she experienced herself as a young aristocrat, and all kinds of scenes from this aristocrat's life. And she was able to describe what they were wearing, even some complex relationship between the vassals and the king and so on, costumes, weapons. There's a lot of detailed information that I had to go to special, literary sources to confirm that this was really happening. She had never been interested in this period, had no intellectual understanding, so this was all coming from her sessions. And then there was a whole sequence of images that had to do with imprisonment, and then finally experience of beheading, of execution, which was happening on a scaffolding, and there was a square which was full of people. Now, what the historical background was, it's after the Battle of the White Mountain, the Habsburgs were trying to break the resistance of the country, so they captured 27 representatives of aristocracy, of noblemen, and they brought them to Prague, and they erected a scaffolding on the old square, old town square, and beheaded them in front of all the people, so that they see that the cream of aristocracy, the most powerful families there, they are now sort of subjected to the Habsburgs. Now we spent a lot of time again using sort of free associations. I was trying to understand how this is related to her life. I thought that she somehow created this story as something where the material came from her own life. I didn't have the concept that it could be some other source, but we were not really getting anywhere. And then the sessions moved to some other areas, and this was kind of forgotten. And then I was already in the United States, working at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, and I got a letter from her, and it started, "You will think that I'm crazy," which was surprising because, if you witness and share a number of psychedelic sessions, it would have to be something pretty extreme that would be considered crazy. But what happened is that she reconnected with her father, whom she didn't have in her life since she was three years old. But now, as an adult woman, she somehow ran into him. They connected, and she was invited for dinner to his home, where he had now a new wife and children. But they were having dinner, and then after the dinner, her father said that he wanted to show her something interesting. And the story was that as we were occupied by Nazi Germany, everybody had to prove that there were no Jewish persons 5 generations back. And this was, very, very serious issue, because it had serious consequences for the people if they couldn't prove that. And so her father did it as all the other people do it. Every family had to prove that. But he somehow got fascinated by this project, and he just continued it for years. In Europe, you can do it because the birth records are kept in the parish houses. It just means a lot of postage. You take, the birth certificate of your parents, and it gives the places where they were born and so on. And it's like a kind of a geometrical line. So he took her into this room, which was adjacent to the dining room, and showed her very, very elaborate genealogy of their family as he reconstructed it. And then he told her very proudly that he found out that they were descendants of one of the aristocrats who were executed on Old Town Square in the 17th century. So what she told me in this letter was that she now believed that emotionally highly pitched memories can be recorded in the DNA and transmitted to future generations. So at first I was extremely impressed and surprised, and seems like a very, very fascinating confirmation of what she experienced. But then I realized there was a problem because one of the powerful experiences that she had was actually the experience of the execution, and something that would be possible today but was not possible in the 17th century was to conceive for somebody who was dead. And so we had this strange confirmation of the content and her close connection somehow to the material, but there was no indication of any kind of material substrate in which this could be transmitted. And this was one of the first observations that I made about what now is called memory without a material substrate, that now emerged in some other areas. The most obvious is the concept of morphogenetic fields that was brought into biology by Rupert Sheldrake. Those again are this information that's transmitted through fields which are not material. It's not the brain, or it's not the DNA. And there's a fascinating book about the nature of reality, which was published recently by Ervin Laszlo, that gives explanation for these kinds of observations, the transmission of information actually through the mediation of this realms which are beyond space-time. This other indication showing that memories might not be actually stored in the brain at all, but stored outside of the brain, and the brain just simply mediates them. And Rupert Sheldrake has, laboratory experimental evidence for the memory without a material substrate. I would like to go to a completely different area now, because I think that's very, very important. I talked about those esoteric systems that have, the saying, as above, so below, as without, so within. This would be systems like Tantra, where you find it, in Kabbalah you find it in the Gnostic tradition. And you can think of statements of the psychics that are equally absurd, or seem equally absurd, which is, I know that I'm an insignificant part of the universe, but each of us is the whole universe. Or, I know we are separate from each other, but we are all one. So the response would be, don't you know Aristotelian logic? You cannot be part and the whole at the same time. You have to choose. Now, this was resolved in a very, very fascinating way when optical holography was discovered. It shows very, very revolutionary way of looking at the relationship between the part and the whole, and how a part can actually represent or stand for the whole. So many of the new approaches to transpersonal psychology are trying to link it to optical holography and also to quantum relativistic physics, where suddenly some of these statements make a lot of sense. So I would like to just show you several pictures of how these esoteric systems portray the idea of the macrocosm being contained in the microcosm. So this first picture is from the Gnostic tradition. Is the image of the Gnostic man. Somebody who has a cosmic nature. The whole cosmos is contained in us, in one human being. And then similar idea is in Kabbalah, is the image of Adam Kadmon, again the cosmic man. And then especially Tantra very much emphasizes the idea that we have, in our inner world, we have access to information about the whole universe. And this particular image is called Purushakara Chakra. Tantra has a way of representing the spiritual ideas either in a very abstract form or in a figurative form. So this is a highly stylized geometrical representation of that same. So as you can see, it looks like an hourglass, and the area in the middle would be the area of the world where we live, and then above you have all the supernal realms, the celestial realms, and at the bottom you have the underworlds. And then here you can see there's a combination. It's a semi-abstract, semi-figurative, but it's the same. The cosmic person. That circle in the middle is the world that we live in. As you can see, it's much more to reality, and it's much more that we can experience in these holotropic states. And some of you might recognize this as the cover of my book, The Cosmic Game, where I describe the various insights into spiritual realms and philosophy in holotropic states. And it's Purushakara Chakra. It's the image from Tantra of the cosmic image. And in this case, it's inspired by the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna asks Krishna, to show himself in his full divine identity. And after some hesitation, Krishna does it, and appears as the cosmic man. So those are the illustrations, the idea of the esoteric systems that the microcosm contains the macrocosm, that it is as above, so below, as without, so within. It was actually first described in the so-called Smaragd tablet, Tabula Smaragdina of Hermes Trismegistus, way back in antiquity. We all got very excited in the 70s when we became aware of holographic thinking. This was a situation where Karl Pribram, the neurosurgeon and brain researcher, wrote a book, 1971, which was called Languages of the Brain, where he came up with the concept of the holographic model of the brain, where the brain, besides having the form of a computer where you have connections of synapses and plus minus processing, there was something called parallel processing that he was describing in this book, which where the whole matter of the brain was actually involved, and it was operating with these holographic principles. So it's a very, very new concept of the brain. And he then cooperated very closely with David Bohm, who had the theory of holo movement, the holographic theory of the universe, where the idea was that what we experience in our everyday life is basically like holograms. He called this the unfolded order or the explicate order. And then for this to exist, there had to be another domain, which was like the creative matrix for it. And this was not available to our senses, but at the same time, it was the matrix out of which these holograms of our everyday life emerged. And he called this implicate order or the enfolded order. And this holographic thinking then could really explain a lot of things that we were experiencing in this, holotropic states of consciousness, and what we knew about mystical experiences, and throwing light on some of the paradoxes and seeming absurdities that you would find in the language of the mystics, coming from an ordinary point of view, from a materialistic point of view. So I will show you the pictures of how a hologram is made. Now, the mathematics that underlies optical holography was developed by Denis Gabor, the Hungarian scientist who lived in Great Britain. And his intention was to improve the resolution of the electronic microscope, which he didn't succeed in, but like a side product of this was the mathematics that made optical holography possible. At a time when it was not actually possible to create optical holograms, because this required a laser. So when laser was then invented in Malibu in California, then this mathematics could actually be used for creating optical holograms. So to make optical holograms, you need a source of laser light. Laser technically is coherent monochromatic light. Coherent means that normally the rays of light are oscillating in all directions, whereas here they are in steps, a very powerful coherent source of light. And the monochromatic means that they are all of the same wavelengths or frequency, which is just the reciprocal value of waves. So the same color, same frequency, same wavelengths. Now to make a hologram, you have the source of laser light, which is here in the upper right corner. And then you have to have a film plate, which is the dark square in the middle, and then object that you are taking the hologram of. And this is the apple that is in the right lower corner. Now you send the laser beam against glass that's partially silver plated. If it were fully silver plated, it would be a mirror. Everything would get reflected. If you didn't have any silver covering, all the light would go through. So this is done in such a way that half of the light is reflected towards the object that you are making a hologram of, and then from there to the film plate, and then the second half that goes through, then is reflected by mirrors to the film plate, where it meets the light that's carrying the image of the object, and what occurs is called interference. So we have the laser light, we have the beam splitter, we have the referential beam, and then we have the working beam, and then we have interference on this film plate. The way to imagine interference is like you have a pond and you throw several pebbles there, and you see the concentric waves that are traveling from the places where the pond was hit by the pebbles, and as they meet, they interact with each other. So when you have two crests, they would create a bigger crest. If you're a crest and a trough, they would cancel each other, and so on. So in the world of light, this has to do with the amplitude. The larger amplitude of the waves, the lighter those points in the hologram will be. Now all holograms would look like this, these concentric circles, the moire patterns. If we have a regular photography, we can tell from the negative what is there. There are trees, there are houses, there are people. This is not possible in a hologram. All hologram, no matter what the objects are, they look the same, like what you see here. Now, if you then expose this and you develop the film and you illumine the hologram, it recreates the wave front, and you will see a three-dimensional image of the object that you photographed. Now this can happen in such a way that you see the object through the plate, which could be glass or film, and you have kind of a limited range in which you can see the hologram from different angles. But you can also make a hologram of a hologram, and then you get what's called a projection hologram, where you send the laser through the film and the hologram appears floating in the air, and then you can walk around, and what you see would be changing depending on the angle. If the person has glasses, as you walk around the hologram, you would see different reflections, replicating what the reflections were in the original situation. If you have a diamond ring, it would be throwing different color facets depending on which direction you would look at it. So why were we so excited about this optical holography? Now there's enormous storage capacity. So where we can have only one picture per frame in ordinary photography, unless we are sort of superposing images for some artistic effect. In a hologram, there can be a large number of objects stored in the form of information. This can be done in two different ways. One is that you change the angle of the laser with each of the objects that you are photographing. And then when you develop it, then as you changing the angle of the laser that's illuminating it, you will kind of tease out one of those objects after another. They all would be in the hologram, but for you to see it, you would have to illuminate with the angle of the laser that actually created the hologram. You can also do it in such a way that you don't change the angle. And then you would get basically all of the objects that you photographed, you would have them occupying the same space. When I was in the 70s very interested in holography, I spent some time in Hawaii, in Honolulu, where they had a great holographic laboratory. And then they created a picture which was called The Child of Hawaii, where they had a number of children who came to the photographic plate and they photographed them without changing the angle. So the final hologram was occupying the space that's normally occupied by one child, but the information about all the children was in it. So as you're looking at it, it seemed like different faces were kind of emerging and looking at you. So the other thing is the incredible possibility of sort of portraying the object in such a way that it would be contained in the entire hologram, that no matter which part of the hologram you would take, you would always get the object that you were photographing. So if you look at this picture, if you have a regular film, regular negative, you would cut it, into two pieces. You would lose half of the information. Now, in a hologram, you can cut it in a number of little pieces, and you can illumine each of them with a laser. And the information about the object is basically distributed, is contained in the whole hologram. So just what we talked about now can be used as in a very interesting way of emulating the experiences in holotropic states, psychedelic sessions, holotropic sessions, and so on. So when I was in that laboratory, one of the demonstrations that they had for me, I would be sitting in darkness, and they would have a hologram which had a number of people where the holograms were taken with changing the angle of the laser. And so as the person was illuminating this hologram from different angles, I would see in darkness, one face after another emerging and then disappearing and being replaced by another, very much like what you could get in psychedelic sessions, in holotropic sessions, and so on. When, on the other hand, they would illumine the picture where you have many persons taken with the same angle, like the Child of Hawaii, you would see space occupied by one person, but the information about all of them would be present in that same space. And as you are looking at it, you would seem to be seeing different faces in that same space. This again mimics another very interesting experience in holotropic states. For example, when I was having a psychedelic session and Christina was sitting for me, at one point I would see her as all women. I looked at her, and for a moment she was like a young girl. And then in another moment she was like a crone, very, very old. And at one point she looked like a Polynesian beauty, and then she was like a medieval witch. So it's like all femininity, all possible manifestations of femininity sort of that were somehow manifesting in the space which was occupied just by her body. So one of the things that was very interesting in this Hawaiian laboratory is that they were offering as a service to newlyweds that they would for free make a wedding hologram for them. And they could actually choose how they wanted this to be done, whether they want to be showing in that hologram as two persons, as a bridegroom and a bride, which means that they would be in front of the plate and there would be just one exposure. And the other possibility would be a hologram that would show them in a kind of tantric fusion. They would be like, you would see one body, but both the bride and the bridegroom would be contained in it. So depending like how you look, how you focus your eyes, you would see elements of the bride or the bridegroom. So here we see something very interesting on this hologram, which is the upper part shows them as being two separate objects. But what we know about holography, the holograms cannot stand on their own. To make a hologram, you have to have much more. Like in this picture, you have to have the source of laser. You have also to have something that gives inflection of the light, which in this case is this hologram. And then the semblance of separate objects is created by interference patterns. So they will be basically dark and light and gray, different shades of gray, or those in between colors. Excuse me. And the interference would then create the semblance of two separate objects. So I hope that you maintain the images that I was showing, and I will just tell you about the implications of this kind of a model. So first of all, I mentioned that the esoteric systems, like the Gnostic system, the Tantric system, the Kabbalah, for example, they have the idea that the individual is a microcosm that contains the whole macrocosm. As above, so below. As without, so within. Now, this normally doesn't make any sense, because if you would say, you know, that you are this small part of the universe, the micro world, that you are at the same time the whole universe, it doesn't make any sense. You have to make a decision. The Aristotelian logic is that you can be either part or the whole. You cannot be both. Now, we saw in holography, this is not the case. If we are interested in what we measure, what we weigh, which is what science does since Galileo asked for that, then a part, you know, is an insignificant part of the whole. It's not identical with the whole. If we are not interested in what the system weighs or measures, we are interested in information, which is what we get in holotropic states of consciousness. Then we have now these holographic principles when the information about the whole can be contained in the part. Now, when we also have the statements of mystics, like, I know that I am separate from you, but from another perspective, you and I are one, okay? Or I know that I'm an insignificant part of the universe, but then I am the whole thing. So if you look at this holographic model, if I'm talking about being an insignificant part, I am talking about this aspect of me that can be measured and weighed, which means, you know, my body, essentially. If I am talking about me being the whole universe, I'm talking about my experiential potential to be anything that's part of the universe, including the universe as such. So in that sense, I'm identical with it. So these two statements are not, they're complementary, they are not mutually exclusive. If I give you an example of an elephant, you know, experiences of many animals, and identification, experiential identification with many animals. And I also, you know, observed it in many, many other people. So I could, for example, experience myself as an elephant. What I would have an information about what it feels like to be an elephant, which would go way beyond anything that I ever learned about elephants. Now, this doesn't mean that when you put me on a scale, you get, you know, 3 tons. It would be substantial, but not 3 tons. So this has nothing to do with the material aspect of what we are talking about. We are talking about information about that phenomenon. So in that sense, you know, you can be part and the whole. You can be separate and one. So this was a very, very elegant way of solving some of the seeming paradoxes or even absurdities that you read about in mystical literature, or that would be implied by transpersonal experiences. So just what I would like to say in general, I hope that you got now a sense that the existence of perinatal domain in the unconscious, the existence of the transpersonal domain, is essential for any kind of serious approach to spirituality, to mysticism, to religion, to understanding something like shamanism, both the shamanic initiatory crisis, which is all about, you know, perinatal sequences of death, rebirth, psychospiritual death, rebirth. Rites of passage that we talk about, again, the experience of death and rebirth. To understand what was happening in ancient mysteries of death and rebirth, or the kinds of experiences that are described in the spiritual practice of the great religions of the world, what the yogis experience, what the Buddhists experience, what the Taoists experience, what the Christian mystics experience. So none of it really makes any sense if you have the kind of model in psychiatry and psychology that we have in mainstream psychiatry, where the model is limited to just the postnatal domain, which is just barely scratches the surface of what the psyche is. Our experiential potential is infinitely larger. It also, in a sense, justifies a spiritual quest as a very legitimate activity. This is not something that has to do with superstition or, you know, childlike, naive thinking or perception of the world. This doesn't have to do with lack of education, with magical thinking, primary process, the way it's called in psychiatry. This has something to do with the fact that if we get involved in serious spiritual quest, some spiritual practice, or if we have spontaneous experiences and form of spiritual emergency, we would have many experiences which have the quality of numinosity. There's a sense of sacredness. We understand that we are in a domain which is radically different from what we experience in everyday life, and we would have a sense that that domain is superordinated to what we experience in everyday life, in a very similar sense in which Plato talked about the ideas or forms with capital letters. That it was a domain of these forms and ideas, and they were actually forming and informing what is happening here. And we will return to this when we talked about astrology, archetypal astrology, how you can then understand how the archetypes which are operating in our reality could be correlated with movements of the planets and the angular relationships that they are taking. So the understanding of the esoteric systems of archetypal astrology, they require the model of the psyche that is not limited to what happened after we were born, that includes the perinatal level and then includes the transpersonal level. So we have now gone through the whole expanded cartography of the psyche that's absolutely essential for anybody who gets involved in some kind of serious self-exploration, serious therapeutic work, and something that's absolutely essential for what we are talking about here is the psychonautics, the use of holotropic states for a variety of purposes, for healing, for artistic, scientific inspiration, for cultivation of intuition and extrasensory perception, and so on. So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to the encounter next week. Thank you very much.